And that's the end of the first half. As the teams head to the locker room, the Spartans lead the Bulldogs by a score.
You guys stink.
Geez, Coach, we're only down a couple of points.
No, I mean you guys really smell. You need to hit the showers. And here, I got every one of you new bars of soap from the Sterling Soap Company. Each bar is artisan crafted using natural ingredients and essential oils. They also have shave soaps, colognes, beard balm, and a whole lot more. Now get in there.
But Coach, we have another half to play.
I don't care. I can't stand to be around you.
A few minutes later.
All right, bring it in tight. You guys are still playing terrible, but you're smelling great out there. Now listen, you're going to need to stock up for the rest of the season. We got a lot of tough games left. So go to sterlingsoap.com after the game. That's STIRLING soap.com. You got that?
Yes, Coach.
Great. Sterlingsoap.com on 3. 1, 2, 3. Sterlingsoap.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hi, everybody. Dan and Andrew here with you. It is time for another one of our random team episodes where we select a team and a year at random and do an hour or so episode on them. We just did one of these a couple months ago and we ended up with the 62-63 Los Angeles Lakers, and we've got a couple of really research intensive episodes coming up with some authors and that type of thing. So we decided as sort of like a little bit of a lighter, low key type of episode, we'd turn around and do yet another one of these random team episodes. And these are usually a lot of fun.
They're fun. We've gotten too many 2000s NFL teams, so hopefully, it'd be nice if we could get a baseball team for once in this. But that's how you know we're not gaming the system, because we've not rigged it to get a team that we would, in our wheelhouse. Or I mean, we haven't put our finger on the scale at all yet. I say yet. We'll see. We get another, and we'll see.
Say that again.
Get another Tampa Bay Buccaneers team, and we'll see. But
yeah, we've done so far. We did the 02 Bucks, and then I think it was like the 77 or 78 Bucks. We did the 07 Arizona Cardinals the year before they went to the Super Bowl, and then we did a Jazz team from the early 80s, and the this last time the 62-63 Lakers. And one of the fun things about this little intro that we're doing here, we're doing this a few weeks before we record the episode to give us time to research, but you all have seen the episode title as you're listening to this, so you know exactly who we've gotten, but we have no idea. So that's part of the fun of this too. The listeners are aware of what this is going to be, and we're totally in the dark.
All right, so I have the first random number generator up, 1 through 3. 1 being MLB, 2 being NBA, 3 being NFL. We agree on that?
Yep, let's go for it.
It is 3, so it is NFL.
Okay, and for NFL, I think we were doing our range was 1950 to the present. And so since we'll be recording this after the Super Bowl, I think we're going to just go ahead and do 1950 to 2025.
Ready?
Yeah.
1989.
Okay, that could be interesting. So,
the NFL team, there were 28 teams in the league at the time?
I believe that is correct. Well, yeah. So who came on since? The new Browns came on, the Panthers, the Jaguars, and the Texans. Yeah, so there were 28 teams then.
So I'm going to pull up the 1989 NFL standings. Is that how we've done this?
Yeah, and what do we usually use? Do we usually use Pro Football Reference?
But I have. So we got AFC is going to be 1 through 14, starting with Bills, ending with Chargers, like first to last.
Mm-hmm.
And then NFC is below that, right?
It is. And before we draw it, I just want to kind of give a little bit of a preview. It was Niners and Broncos. This was the third Broncos Super Bowl in 4 years. This was the biggest blowout. So those are some possibilities. You got Bo Jackson on the Raiders with Marcus Allen. You got the Giants at 12-4, losing to the losing to the Rams in the playoffs. You got Philly with Buddy Ryan. You got a Cleveland Browns team. It's not that year. It's a year or two later, but it's very Tecmo Super Bowl. So we're probably going to get a team that we know a decent amount about because of the having played Tecmo Super Bowl, which was based on the following season in 1990.
Yeah, and just all the videos and stuff around that era. All right, I'm going to random number generated. I'll read the number and then we'll figure it out, okay?
Okay.
It is 21.
All right, so we're in the NFC.
9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I believe. So this is interesting. It's the 1989 Green Bay Packers.
That is a very interesting team.
Are you looking at the standings?
They were 10-6.
Did you guess what their record was? I don't think you'd say 10-6.
You know, it's funny. I was actually just reading something about this team the other day because somehow I started thinking about Don Majkowski, the Magic Man, who was the quarterback on this team. This was, they missed it. I don't know anything about this. We'll find out. They lost the NFC Central on a tiebreaker. Their coach was a first-year coach named, or no, not a first-year coach, a second-year coach named Lindy Infante, who won Coach of the Year this year, and their quarterback was Don Majkowski, who led the league in completions and passing yards, 4,318 passing yards. And so I believe was Sterling Sharp on this. Yep, Sterling Sharp was on this team, led the league in receptions. So I think this is going to be interesting. I know we were kind of hoping to get away from the modern day NFL, kind of the NFL of our lifetimes, but this is going to be an interesting one, I think.
Yeah, but this could have gone worse. I'm okay with how this went.
And from the end of the Lombardi years until the Favre years, there were really only 1 or 2 years that the Packers made the playoffs, and this was one of the years they didn't make it, but they came close. So there's a lot here.
Yeah, this will be a good one.
All right. Well, we're going to go away for a couple of weeks, but in listeners' time, it's going to be about 12 seconds, and you'll hear us in a couple minutes, and we're going to be experts on the 1989 Green Bay Packers. All right, and hello, old sports. This is Dan and Andrew. I won't do the full formal introduction because you just heard us, but just a reminder to check us out, hellooldsports@gmail.com. Find us at Facebook, Hello Old Sports Podcast, etc., etc., etc. Couple weeks or so our time and 7 seconds or so in listener time, and we are ready to talk about the 1989 Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, and I've warmed up to in studying this. I warmed up a little to the topic. Certainly, we could have done a lot worse just with Packer teams in that time frame. So I think this is actually, compared to some of the other choices, just with like the Packers, we ended up in a good spot. And another thing I'll mention in a little bit, but like, it also, even though, this isn't necessarily a team you think of in that era, it got to like, it's definitely a cool era of the NFL to talk about. So it was definitely like, it was kind of a different spin on, familiar ground from a different perspective.
So I don't know where you want to start with this. We usually give sort of a general overview of the team in the preceding years. Maybe do you want to just give sort of a quick recap of what the state of play was with the Green Bay Packers as 1989 dawned?
Yeah, and I'll kind of preface this by, again, most people who've listened to more than one episode of this, know sort of our backstories, but it's. I wonder if sometimes people end up across this, like somebody did a podcast, like if they're a Packers fan and they're like, there's a podcast here on the 1989 Packers, and listen to it without knowing anything about us or whatever. I was born in 1986. My earliest football memories are like 93, 94 for the most part. It is amazing how different the Packers were by then than they were in the 30 years preceding that. You know, the Packers became a cornerstone NFL franchise again. They played all their games at Lambeau Field. So, like, I realized the first couple of years I watched the Packers, they were still playing games in Milwaukee, but that seems like such a relic to me. Like, that seems like, oh, that was something from the 70s. You know, so this team, in my head, this team has a lot more in common with the 1973 Packers than it does with the 1993 Packers, which was just 4 years later.
Yeah, well, and I mean, obviously a big part of that is Favre and Holmgren starting to win. I actually remember, I think it was 1994, their last game in Milwaukee. I remember watching, it was obviously late in the season, and I remember watching that and Chris Berman saying, and this will be the final game in Milwaukee for the Green Bay Packers, and me not fully understanding what that meant. Basically what happened there was that the city or the team or whoever it was decided to put a ton of money into Lambeau Field, and the argument basically was, we're not going to put all this money into this stadium if they're still going to play 3 home games a year in another city. And especially in the 60s and 70s, and especially during the days of 14 game seasons, they're almost just as much a Milwaukee team as they are a Green Bay team. It's this sort of vaunted, well, they're this small town team, but they were playing almost as many regular season games in Milwaukee. Plus they played a playoff game in Milwaukee one year. So in a lot of ways, yeah, this wasn't the Boston Celtics going to Hartford once or twice a year to play a game. They were almost as much a Milwaukee team during this time frame, including 1989, as they were Green Bay.
So we'll do this quick. 1967, they win Super Bowl II. Vince Lombardi rides off into the sunset, or so we think. 68, they fall to 6-7-1. The team was old. You know, that Packers thing, had Lombardi stayed, they still would have needed to totally refresh their roster. But let's not go up and down on that. But
we don't have to go up and down on it, but I do have to plug that we did an episode on teams that tried to three-peat in Super Bowls, and this was obviously the very first one we talked about. So check that out.
So between 1968, they make the playoffs again in 72. They go 10-4. They win the division. They lose their first playoff game. This is in the era of 4 teams making the playoffs. They lose to the Redskins in 72. They then don't make the playoffs again until 1982, a weird strike year. They go 5-3-1 in that era, in that run. They're actually the 3 seed. They beat the St. Louis Cardinals in the playoffs in the first round. That was like a year they did something weird. They called it the playoff tournament. 8 teams. Excuse me. I think 8 teams in each conference made the playoffs. And that was in the league, 28 teams at the time. They beat St. Louis. It's the first playoff game at Lambeau since the Ice Bowl, and the next one wouldn't be till 1994. Then they lose in the second round to Dallas. In between that, they were more bad than good, mostly like 5-9 would have kind of been on the average. After 82, and by the way, at this point, Bart Starr is the coach. Dan Devine was there for a few years. Then it was Bart Starr for a while. Then it was Forrest Gregg for a while. After 82, they have a couple of straight 8-8 seasons, 83, 84, 85. And then preceding going into the year we're going to talk about, things really bottom out. 86, they go 4-12. 87, they're 5-9-1. 88, they are 4-12 again. Going into 1988, the year before this, Forrest Gregg is replaced, which ends about a 15-year, 13-year period where guys from that, 60s Packers teams were the coach, first Bart Starr and then Forrest Gregg. And Lindy Infante becomes the coach in 1988.
So, yeah, Infante gets hired beginning with the 88 season. The Starr had actually been fired for Forrest Gregg. They'd fired Starr and brought Forrest Gregg in, which created some awkwardness because the two of them had been teammates. And Jerry Kramer, in his book, Distant Replay, about the reunion of the 66 Packers, talks about that sort of awkwardness there because by that point, Greg was the head coach, but Bart Starr had been fired to bring Greg in. So that makes for a little bit of a different kind of a dynamic there. Forrest Gregg, who had been a Hall of Fame offensive tackle for the Green Bay Packers, a guy who was probably the best player on that offense. There's obviously a ton of Hall of Famers, but, you know, as far as all-time greats, Forrest Gregg, at least on the offense of those 60s Packers teams, Forrest Gregg is the one who's probably the most of an all-time great. The Packers don't really acquit themselves very well during that time period. In fact, they kind of get a reputation for being a dirty team during those 4 years under Forrest Gregg. And they not only are a dirty team, but they're also not a very good team. 8-8 the first 2 years, 4-12 the third year, and then 5-9-1 in the fourth. I don't know the whole story behind this, but he kind of, I think Greg kind of sort of jilts them almost. Like he basically decides that he's going to leave the Packers to go take the head coaching job at SMU, Southern Methodist University, which was his alma mater. And I don't know exactly what the cadence of things was there, but it didn't really end well between Greg and the Packers. And I had talked about in a couple of the documentaries that I watched in preparation for this episode, that was one of the big emphasis, was how Greg just really, this is a guy who had taken a team to the Super Bowl. He'd taken the Cincinnati Bengals to the Super Bowl in 1981 and lost to the 49ers. So he'd had some success. He just kind of gives the impression of a guy who's kind of out of control of his team. They're dirty, they're penalized, all this type of thing. So he leaves after the 87 season, goes to SMU.
So the interesting thing, too, if you think about Forrest Gregg leaves in 1987 to take the SMU job.
And they're not long for this world either.
He had already gotten the death penalty. He took over 86 was the year their football season was canceled. 88, they were technically allowed to play their 7 regular season away games. They weren't going to play any home games. They basically let everybody transfer out, and they ended up with no team in 1988, so they didn't have a season in 88. So Forrest Gregg left to basically take over an SMU program that had gotten the death penalty. So maybe he felt a sense of loyalty to like resurrect his alma mater, but like that was not a good job to be taking.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Maybe he did that out of some sort of a sense of loyalty to his alma mater. And so he's replaced by Lindy Infante, who had been just previously, he'd been a bunch of different places. He'd been a head coach with Jacksonville in the USFL. He actually was an offensive assistant with the Giants in 1977 and 1978, basically right before the Giants start to turn it around and bring in George Young and Ray Perkins and all those types of guys, Parcells and Belichick. But in 86 and 87, he had been the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns, and that had been the Bernie Kosar Cleveland Browns team that had lost to Denver in heartbreaking fashion in both the 86 and 87 AFC championship games. And so going into the 88 season, they've got a new coach in Lindy Infante. And I believe, what year did they draft? Is this Mikowski's first year? No, they drafted Don Mikowski the year before in 1987. He had started 5 games for them in that weird 1987 in the NFL where there was the strike kind of messed with everything. And then I'm also just trying to see what Sterling Sharp's rookie year was 88. So Infante drafts Sterling Sharp, future Hall of Fame receiver, in his first draft as head coach.
Yeah, and so I think you lead into a good point. And this honestly will be a mostly positive story as we talk about the 88 Packers and kind of like, hey, what a fun little team. We really do have to start with the draft in 1989. And one of the biggest busts in NFL history for a number of reasons. And that's because the Packers enter with the number 2 pick in the draft. And
4-12 in 1988.
They take Tony Mandarich, an offensive tackle from Michigan State. Now, before we get into any of the other stuff, let's just talk about Tony Mandarich himself. Tony Mandarich is, I feel like, and again, somebody who was alive and following football in this era would be like, you know, a lot of people talk about Brian Bosworth. Brian Bosworth at least had a few good years in the NFL, and you know, at least like Tony Mandarich is like the even worse version of what people talk about with Brian Bosworth. He was considered the best offensive line prospect ever. He was a unanimous All-American in 1988. He won the Lineman of the Year, the UPL Lineman of the Year in 1988. He was like really fast for a lineman ever, especially from the time then. He also had sort of a nose for publicity. He challenged Mike Tyson to a fight. I think talked about he was like a big Guns N' Roses fan. Not that there's anything specifically wrong with that, but he gets picked number 2 overall, goes on a long holdout, doesn't sign until right before the season starts. And this isn't a thing where you could say like injuries or whatever. He played his first season. He played 9 offensive series for the entire season, 9 series, and he was healthy. Quoted as saying, "I am not like other players." And they have to understand that. If they don't like it, that's just the way I am, and they're going to have to learn to like it. And just to sort of forward it real quick, he did end up starting every game in 90 and 91, but he was bad. He allowed 21 sacks, 36 knockdowns. They basically eventually move on from him, and he spends a couple of years with the Colts, and you know, then stuff comes out later about steroids and everything. He had a drug problem, he had an alcohol problem, and you know, washed out of the league. All of that is horrible for a number 2 pick. It's about to get more horrible in a minute, but Dan, go ahead.
So, yeah, this guy is really touted as maybe no offensive line prospect has been before, or maybe even in the almost 40 years since. Front page of Sports Illustrated in 1989, the draft preview issue, and this is 1989. The front page of Sports Illustrated means a lot in those days, and it's a picture of him shirtless, and it says the incredible bulk. 6'6", 315-pound Tony Mandarich, the best offensive line prospect ever. And in reading some of the contemporaneous news accounts, I think it was Dallas. I don't quote me on that, but there were definitely, when did Dallas pick in this draft? Dallas picked first, actually. I thought I saw somewhere where somebody was saying that they thought this was somebody who was a Cowboys supporter that wanted Dallas to pick Mandarich. So, and we'll talk in a second about who they end up picking. And there's all sorts of hype around his workout routine and, you know, what makes him the physical specimen that he is. The steroid rumors with him start almost immediately. I think they're even out there as he's getting ready to get drafted. And in I watched they did a great documentary a few years back on the 100th anniversary of the Packers, and there's a little, 2-minute segment on Tony Mandarich in the 1980s episode, and everybody just talks about how, nobody talks about Tony Mandarich without then subsequently saying steroids. But at the time, they thought this guy was going to be the best offensive lineman of all time, maybe.
Yep, and you're right. There was immediately stuff about steroids. There's a guy we're probably going to talk. He also referred to Green Bay as a village, and not in a positive way. There's a Tim Harris, who's a guy we're going to probably talk about in a little while, in the context of this team, in like one of the first full padded practices at training camp, he was just carving Mandarich up, and I guess told his teammates this guy's going to be a bust. And Tim Harris, it says, I just remember going through him like a hot knife through butter, laughing at him. Harris told ESPN about Mandarich. This was obviously years later. I was thinking at the time, wow, what a big bust. We put $1 million in this guy. Mandarich admitted in TV interviews in his autobiography years later that he stopped using steroids in the NFL.
You said he admitted to he stopped using steroids?
Maybe that's an excuse he gave years later, but it is an excuse he gave years later, like he because of the testing or whatever, and that's why he wasn't as effective. It sounds like it was everything. It sounds like he had bad habits. Maybe wasn't that good. Maybe fast for alignment in college wasn't good enough to be fast for alignment in the NFL at the time of the 80s with the pass rushers. There's always pass rushers. Quickly washed out, like pick a guy number 2 in the draft. He really does nothing of significance in his NFL career. All of that is bad enough. You mentioned the Cowboys have the number 1 pick. They take Troy Aikman. Obviously goes on to win 3 Super Bowls, Hall of Famer. Mr. Cowboy from a quarterback standpoint. And again, you could say, well, they didn't have a chance at Aikman. Okay, all right. Aikman went 1. Aikman
And they might have thought they had their quarterback with Don Majkowski.
Aikman goes number 1, Hall of Famer. Packers take Tony Mandarich. Number 3, Barry Sanders to the Detroit Lions. Number 4, Derek Thomas to the Kansas City Chiefs. And number 5, Deion Sanders to the Atlanta Falcons. You're not just talking good players, Pro Bowlers. You're really not even talking just Hall of Famers. You're talking like Hall of Famers. You know what I mean? Like, say what you will about Deion Sanders, as a whatever media figure. He's one of the greatest cover corners of all time.
I just want to look here and see. I know Aikman is not, but who else? Barry Sanders is on the all-time team. Deion Sanders is on the NFL 100 all-time team. I don't know if Derek Thomas is on it, but I'm going to look that up right now. No, I guess Thomas did not make his way onto it, but he was, pretty close. So, yeah, you got 4 guys. If you want to be a little generous and call Aikman an all-time great, maybe just by virtue of the fact that Aikman won 3 Super Bowls, he's an all-time great. But yeah, they are. Those are real. This isn't Randall McDaniel or somebody, not to denigrate him, but like these are well-known household names, multiple-time All-Pros, some of them multiple-time Super Bowl champions. That type of Hall of Famer,
and picked right after him too. Like I could point out, Steve Atwater was picked 20th and went to the Hall of Fame. Okay, but a bunch of teams passed on him.
Yeah, 12 other teams whiffed on him in between.
3 picks right after them were Barry Sanders, Derek Thomas, and Deion Sanders. Now, the funny thing is, over the course of the next 10 years, the Packers would win a Super Bowl. Barry Sanders wouldn't have any team success. Derek Thomas, I don't think ever won a Super Bowl.
No.
And Deion won 2. But like, again, think about if they had, like, how is football history different if with the 2nd overall pick in the 1989 draft, the Green Bay Packers take Barry Sanders?
Yeah, and you got to figure that's who it would have been.
Probably.
Either that or Thomas.
All right. So we talked about the draft. We won't have to mention Tony Mandarich again as we get into the actual season.
I know there were a couple games. You talked about only playing 9 offensive series. I think you said there were a couple games where he played 1 offensive play. Like he went in for like a jumbo package on 3rd and short.
Oh, okay. So you mentioned a couple of these guys. Sterling Sharp is in his 2nd year. 88 was his rookie year with Green Bay. He played in all team games. He had 91 or 55 receptions for 791 yards, again on a pretty poor Packers team. He was a rookie. So he had sort of taken the team by storm, as offensive firepower. Don Mikowski was it Mikowski or is it Majkowski?
I think it's just Mikowski, but because there's the silent J in his name, he got the nickname of the Magic Man.
Let's commit to Mikowski, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Like you said, he started a handful of games in 87, 88. He, put up decent numbers outside of the wins and losses. Threw for over 2,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. So those are the two big offensive players. I mean, some of these names I remember, but most of them I remember because of Tecmo Super Bowl. Because that game came out like 2 years later. But those would really be the two biggest offensive players. On the defense, the aforementioned Tim Harris is one of the leaders on the defense. And I'll give you the only other name that really jumped out at me as I was looking at this team was that Chris Jackie rather. Chris Jackie is the quarterback for this team starting this year, and he would be the kicker. What did I say something else? Quarterback?
You said he was the quarterback.
No, he was not. Chris Jackie was the kicker on this team, and he would be the kicker up through like the 96 team that won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, Tim Harris is the starting right outside linebacker. Guy has a heck of a year. This is his best year as a pro by far. He's got 19 and a half sacks. And what's the record at this point? It's Gastineau with 21 or something?
22. He had 22.
Yeah, and that's the record that Strahan breaks in 2002, right? Or 2001, whatever year. So, yeah, all-pro, first team all-pro, second in voting for Defensive Player of the Year behind Keith Millard, the Vikings defensive tackle. Like I said, 19 and a half sacks. He had 13 and a half the year before. One of the things that I saw was that one of the quotes I saw in one of the contemporary articles that I read said that no team in the NFL, no defense in the NFL was as dependent on a single player as the Packers were on Tim Harris. I also saw that he was really, really sort of a combative guy. He would get into it with the opposing fans when they'd be playing an away game. He would sort of taunt and get into it with the opposing team's fans. He would get into it with the opposing teams, their players. He had a really bad, almost came to blows with Eric Kramer, the Vikings quarterback, after a game in 1989. Kramer says afterwards that he's not going to vote for Harris for the Pro Bowl because of what a jerk he is. And Harris basically says they can tell me to stop doing what I'm doing, but I'm not going to do it. Maybe some of the carryover from kind of the undisciplined, borderline dirty play of the Forrest Gregg years. The other guy that I wanted to mention, because this is interesting, guy who's 33 years of age and in his very last season is John Anderson, who has been a linebacker with the Packers going all the way back to 1978. I don't know if he's the only guy on this team left from the 82 playoff team, but he's got to be one of the only. And I don't know anything about this guy, but I've always wanted to learn more. Guy plays for 12 seasons with the Packers in the NFL. He has some seasons where he misses significant time to injury, but most years 16, 16, 16, 14, 13. Never makes a Pro Bowl, never has more than 6 sacks. But for some reason, John Anderson is on the Hall of Fame's all 1980s team, which I just think is really, really, really interesting. And just give me a minute here because I want to do a little bit of a thought exercise here. Let me find this guy. Yeah. Linebacker for the Green Bay Packers. He's a member of the all 1980s decade team. The other linebackers on that team, I'll give you both the first and the second team. Lawrence Taylor, Ted Hendricks, Andre Tippett. That's 3 Hall of Famers. Jack Lambert, Mike Singletary, and then Carl Banks, who we have a soft spot for Carl Banks, obviously, but, not a great player, but still all-pro, Pro Bowler, won 2 Super Bowls. And then John Anderson, who was never an all-pro, never a Pro Bowl, 2 playoff games his entire career, never really did anything of any real note other than just show up and play in Green Bay for over a decade. So I've always been fascinated by his presence on the 1980s All-Decade team.
So since we talked about Tim Harris's year, I'll give some of these end of the year stats, and then we'll get into some of these games because there's a lot of interesting stuff. Mikowski starts every game. He ends up with a 4,000 yard passing season, 4,300 passing yards, actually 27 touchdowns to 20 interceptions. Sterling Sharp has 90 receptions for 1,423 yards and 12 touchdowns. Just a phenomenal season. Like that, those numbers for any era, but especially for that era, are tremendous. Their leading rusher is their fullback, Brent Fullwood, who runs for 821 yards. The next leading rusher is Don Mikowski with 358 yards. So it's a team that averages just a little over 100 rushing yards a game. But Fullwood, he's knocking on the door of 1,000. He's not quite there, but he's getting there. And then you mentioned on defense, really led by Tim Harris on defense. Dave Brown has 6 interceptions, which leads the team. See if anybody else had a really high sack total. No, nobody else really has more than 2 sacks. Robert Brown has 3, but there's really not much room for the sacks to go around after Tim Harris. Like I said, there's a lot of these games to get to. I guess we just set the stage for the NFL, particularly the NFC in 1989.
Before you do that, I just want to mention one more thing, and that is that in June of 1989, they hire a new team president. They hire Bob Harlan, who is the first, even though he had previously worked for the Packers and spent some time in Green Bay, he is the first Packers team president who had not been somebody who basically had lived his whole life in Green Bay. He was not he was the first guy who hadn't been a Packers, a local Green Bay business leader or something like that. But he had been with the team since 1971. He had actually gotten his start in professional sports as the director of public relations for the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team. But he'd been with the Packers for, 16, 17 years. He ends up being team president all the way through to 2006. So he's there for pretty much the whole Favre era, all the titles, all those types of things. Guy who's still around to this day. His son actually is Kevin Harlan, who is a well-known sportscaster and has done all sorts of stuff. He's done, I think Kevin Harlan's probably done. God, yeah, he's done everything. He's done NBA, he's done NFL, he's done. I guess he hasn't done any baseball, Kevin Harlan, but he's done a ton of stuff, done a ton of radio and that type of thing. So, yeah, and he actually narrates the 10-part series on the history of the Packers that the team put out, a bunch of years back. So they finally are maybe starting to become a little bit more of that type of professional, sort of not small town type team, and bringing in a guy who is not a Green Bay guy. He's a football guy, even though his whole football career is with the Packers. So things are starting to evolve a little bit as the 1989 season dawns.
So just to sort of briefly set the stage in the NFL and really the NFC particularly, we're very much in the age of NFC dominance, from the mid 80s to the mid 90s. The 49ers had won the Super Bowl in 88. They, that was the Walsh's last year, the changeover to George Seifert in 89. You had your powers like the Giants in the East and the Redskins, and the Eagles were starting to get good. And in the NFC Central, which is where the Packers were, the Bears had sort of run, been riding high for most of the 80s. I don't know if a lot of people realize just how close it was to being over at this point. You had Tampa, who was kind of a doormat, generally, along with Green Bay. Detroit and Minnesota were sort of in that middle tier. And then the Packers, I think you would have to put them down on that lower tier with Tampa going into this season. This would be the last year of 5 playoff teams. And that's going to loom very large at the end of this discussion for this Packers team. There's a lot of interesting games to discuss here. And I just want to start out by saying, like, this team is not, they don't rotate wins and losses, but they are 1-1, 2-2, 3-3, 4-4, and 5-5. So there's a lot of parity in this team, at least through the first 10 games. Did you have anything to say? Go ahead.
Yeah, just on the NFC Central, the Bears had won the NFC Central. I think the previous, going into this, they won it in 88 at 12-4. They won it did they win it in 87? That was such a weird year. But yeah, they did win it at 11-4. And then 86, they won it. 85, they won it. Obviously, that was their 15-1 dominant Super Bowl championship year. They won it in 84. I'm just trying to see how many consecutive years in a row the Bears had won. Okay, it had been since 83 when the 9-7 Detroit Lions won that somebody had won other than Chicago had won the NFC Central. But even though they had never cracked through and won the division, the Minnesota Vikings were something of a power in the NFC. In 87, they had won the wild card and then actually made it all the way to the conference championship game against the Redskins and lost a close one, lost 17-10. They'd made the playoffs in 88 and lost to San Francisco in the divisional round. So even though the Bears had dominated the NFC Central regular season, the Vikings, who would end up being Green Bay's biggest rival in 89, had been a pretty good team of their own right for a little while.
So they open the season, and like I mentioned, there's a lot of rotating of wins and losses. This team plays a ton of close games this year, and we're going to highlight some interesting things, but I'll just go through the first handful of games. And, if you have anything on any of these you wanted to touch on, let me know. But they open up at home, kind of an ominous start. They lose at home to the Bucks, 23-21 in week 1. And then they are at home again. Go ahead.
Sorry, let me just, as you go through these, I'll give you the little tidbit notes that I have, but just bear with me while I pull them up here. And maybe what I'll do here is I'll also I'll have the box score up. So yeah, you were saying they lose game 1 to Tampa Bay, right?
Yeah, at Lambeau, 23-21.
Yeah, they lose, and Mikowski and the offense are booed coming off the field.
I have to mention at this point too, as I was getting done, I know some of these games we'll talk about later. I watched some highlights of. I stumbled across, and I guess I should have known this. There's a video yearbook for this team.
Yeah, I watched it.
I think a lot of people we've a bunch, but we used to rent the 90 Giants video yearbook, and I used to watch it all the time. And now it's on YouTube, and I'll watch it every couple of months, while I'm in the gym. And I think for a long time you think, oh, this was just for the Super Bowl teams, and they're longer for the Super Bowl team. They used to make one for each team every year. And what sticks in my mind is watching them. This will sound weird, but we'd go on vacation, usually to the Jersey Shore. Not always, but usually to the Jersey Shore. It's we'd go to the beach in the morning and then maybe have lunch. And usually there'd be a few hours in the afternoon before we did whatever we were going to do that night, where we'd kind of be hanging around, and maybe my parents would lay down and maybe I'd go to the pool or whatever. But I just remember these things always being on ESPN2 at 2:00 in the afternoon. And they'd take a team that went 4-12 and make them seem like they really almost won the Super Bowl. And it's because they would only show the games they won. So they would just skip. If you were a terrible team, they'd show highlights of the 3 games you won.
Or I know like the 92 Giants one, the last 15 minutes are about hiring Dan Reeves. Like they sort of like they zip through how terrible the team was in 92, and then it's like, and a new hope has dawned. I think Frank Gifford probably narrated it because it was the Giants.
Okay.
A new hope has joined, and it's, it's Dan Reeves. So a lot of times it wouldn't even be about what had happened. It's about like trying to hype you up for the next season if the team had been bad.
So the next week 2, they're at home again I should say at Lambeau when I say they're at home, just to specify. They're once again at home at Lambeau Field. This time they play the Saints, and they win a close game 35-34 to get to 1-1.
Yeah, and this is a good Saints team. This is the Saints team that's got all those great linebackers for that whole period in the late 80s and early 90s. The Saints would be really good on defense, and especially at the linebacker position. This is future Hall of Famer Ricky Jackson, future Hall of Famer Sam Mills. This is Pat Swilling with 16.5 sacks. So a really good Saints team. And they're booed off the field at halftime again, down 24-7. But Mikowski leads them on a fourth quarter comeback, 4 touchdowns in the third and fourth quarters, including 3 touchdown passes from Mikowski, the last of which is the game-winning touchdown pass in the waning seconds of the game to Sterling Sharp with looks like with about a minute and a half left.
All right, you good to move on?
Yeah.
All right, so then we go out west to Anaheim Stadium, and they play the Rams in week 3, and they lose 41-38. So if you're counting so far, they've lost by 2, won by 1, lost by 3 out in Anaheim to the Rams.
And this is another interesting one. They are down 38-7 to the Rams, but they still actually almost come back. They score on a touchdown from 1 yard out by Brent Fullwood with how much time is left here? Over 2 minutes. They kick the extra point. They decide to kick it off rather than onside kick it. And it looks like the Rams kind of make short work of it. They never even get to a third down here, but Everett gets a few first downs for LA, and that's the end of it. But yeah, down 31 points, and they still are in the game with a minute left because they come back so much.
All right. So now we go to Milwaukee County Stadium on October 1st for the Packers and the Falcons. Once again, a close game. And once again, it's the Packers evening up their record at 2-2 as they beat the Falcons at County Stadium. I guess you have to specify with those two teams at Milwaukee County Stadium, 23-21.
Down 21-6 in the fourth quarter before they score 17 unanswered points. The final score is the game-winning field goal by Chris Jackie. Had a kickoff return by Deion Sanders, not for a touchdown. Deion has a kickoff return for a touchdown. Had that not been called back for holding, they probably would have not been able to pull out the win. So they've had they're 2-2, and both of their wins have been miraculous comebacks in the third and fourth quarter. They're starting to get the nickname of the Cardiac Pack.
All right, now we're going to get to a little quirk. 5th game of the year, they're back at Lambeau, so 4 of their first 5 games are at home. This one is not close as they beat up on the Dallas Cowboys. This would be the first year of Jimmy Johnson, 1-15 Dallas Cowboys, and the Packers beat the crap out of them, 31-13. 2 actually little quirks here. One we'll have to get to in a minute. You know what the first one of these is? What's interesting about this game?
I have a fact, but I feel like your fact is going to be one of these two. So why don't you go ahead and tell me?
This is the first trip of the Cowboys. No cussing. This is the first trip of the Cowboys to Lambeau Field since the Ice Bowl in 1967.
I did not do this, but did you look up to see if there was a Milwaukee game in their interim? There had to have been in 22 years, right?
You would imagine. Yeah, I did not either. I can actually probably do that now. I'm a little surprised because, well, no, I guess it wouldn't be shocking that they would put the Cowboys in the bigger stadium in like the 70s or something like that. I was going to say you'd think they'd play that game in Green Bay, but if Milwaukee was a bigger stadium.
Yeah, and scheduling was so weird and quirky in those days too. They might have only come to play the Packers once in 15 years anyway.
Yeah, I'm looking for a list. I didn't see an entry on it. I don't see an actual like list. I could probably try to find it, but I don't know that now's the moment to do that. So do you know what the next little quirk is here?
I don't. I only had one fact.
Okay, so they play the Cowboys on October the 8th. The next game, they are at the Metrodome in Minnesota to play the Vikings. Do you know what happened between those two games during that week?
Oh, I did see this. Yeah, this was the Herschel Walker trade, so they played Herschel 2 games in a row.
Yeah, so the Herschel Walker was traded on, I guess, like Thursday to the Vikings. He goes and plays for the Vikings right away. So the Packers play the Vikings. They play 2 weeks in a row against Herschel Walker.
And he's 1-1 against them.
They're less successful in this one. They lose 26-14 and fall to 3-3.
And then it's on to Miami.
Yep. So then they go to Miami. They lose again, 23-20 in a close game. So now they're 3-4. They're one. They're 0-3 on the road at this point. And they fall to 3-4.
And this is another one they almost come back in. They're down 20-6 in the fourth quarter, and Mikowski gets 2 touchdown passes to Sterling Sharp to tie the game up at 20, and then they kick it away to Marino, and Marino drives down the field 24, 20, 14, and then a 33-yard field goal by Pete Stoyanovich. So, Marino just drives right back down the field to take the game. But again, had Miami missed a field goal, they would have got into overtime with a chance to win another comeback game in the fourth quarter.
All right. So the next week, they're 3-4. They're under 500 again. And like I said, they were 1-2, 2-2, 3, 1-1, 2-2, 3-3. And now they're going to get to 4-4. They're back at County Stadium again on October 29th against the Lions. And this one, after almost going to overtime, this one does go into overtime, and the Packers win 23-20 to even their record at 4-4.
Lions actually win the toss and elect to receive, but then on the very first play, their quarterback, Rodney Peete, is picked off deep in his own territory by Mark Murphy, the Packers safety. So they basically just have to run a couple plays into the line before they are able to kick. Jackie's able to kick a relatively easy field goal. They also are really helped here by where is this? I got to find this here. Late in the game in regulation, the Lions are driving, and the Tim Harris, the best player on the defense, who's having a career year, as we talked about, knocks the ball loose from Rodney Peete and recovers it himself. So they, and Detroit's terrible, so it's not like this game would have helped Detroit stay in the game, because Detroit's only 1-7 after this game. But another close win, and this time against a division rival, and 2 big plays by 2 of their better defensive players, Murphy and Harris.
All right. So now we go to one of probably definitely the 2 highlights of the season for this Packer team. And we're at week 9. We're at November 5th, or November, whatever, early November. We're in week 9. It is the November 5th, 1989, Packers against the Bears at Lambeau. The Bears have beaten the Pack. The Packers have not beaten the Bears since 1984. And it's not surprising when you think about how good the Bears were in that time frame. But, playing them twice a year, the Packers had not beaten them since 84. And I'm going to say, well, the Bears weren't very good before that. I was going to say probably not a whole lot before then, but, I know they were both bad in the 70s. So Bears, obviously won the Super Bowl a couple of years before that, still by all outward appearances riding high as one of the the best teams in the NFC. I think they've lost the NFC Championship game to the 49ers at home the year before that. Because
the Bears?
The 88 49ers only went like 10-6, I think.
Well, yeah, that was the year that the Bears won the Fog Bowl against Philly was 88. So they definitely made it to they lost. They got smacked pretty good. They lost 28-3 to the Niners, but they'd been there, yeah.
So Packers this game is known as the instant replay game, and I can't say I was very familiar with that. Instant replay had been instituted in the NFL in like 86, I think. And then I don't remember when it got killed in the early 90s, but it was the early 90s. And then it came back in like 98 or 99 or something.
And I think this game had a little bit of why it was gone for a while.
So it's 7-6. The Bears score and go up 13-7 going into the fourth quarter. Packers had a couple of turnovers. Packers get the ball back with about 5 minutes left around their own 25-yard line. They get to the 7-yard line with a minute and a half to go. Mikowski sacked, fumbles, but the Packers recover, so they're back at the 14. Incompletion on second down, incompletion on third down. It's 4th and goal from the 14-yard line with 41 seconds left. Mikowski gets the snap, scrambles, he's pressured. He throws it to Sterling Sharp. The line judge throws a penalty for an illegal forward pass, which would mean that it was a loss of down, and the Bears would basically just have to take a knee and win the game. They buzz down or do whatever they did back then. I think flashed one of those big lights like at this, like at sea.
I don't think it's that.
They said they wanted to take a look at it. They took 4 minutes to review it. They overturned the penalty. The touchdown stands. So they said, and it's funny, I was just watching a game from 2008, a Giant game where this play came up, but it was, 2008. So they had a red line and, showed you that the way it works is your whole body has to be over the line of scrimmage when you get rid of the ball. It's not like if any part of you, if your one leg is in the air and your toes are still behind the line of scrimmage, it's technically not over the line of scrimmage. So they look at it, they reveal it's a touchdown. They get the extra point. They go up 14-3. Bears don't end up being able to do anything with 30 seconds left, and Green Bay escapes with a big upset. Maybe not big in terms of the spread, but big in terms of the stature of the win for the Packers.
I found this on Wikipedia, but I think it's true. This is also sometimes known as the asterisk game because for the next 10 years, the Bears put an asterisk next to the result in their media guide. And it said 1989 Bears results, and this game against the Packers, they would always put a star next to it.
I mean, it is interesting to overturn that call with what evidence they likely would have had back then. Like not having a million camera angles. And I know 1989 is not the 30s, but like compared to even 10, 12 years later, the lack of I'm wondering, maybe it was, I didn't see this call. Maybe it really was a horrendously egregious call. And that's why they felt comfortable overturning it. But ultimately the Bears end up missing the playoffs. The Bears they win the following week and then they lose 6 straight games and miss the playoffs in 1989.
And this game ties them with the Bears at 5-4. The Vikings had actually had their own this sort of thrilling victory. They had beaten they had won 23-21 in overtime. And if you'll just bear with me a second, I can tell you who they played. They played the Rams, the same Ram team that the Packers had come back against earlier in the season. So going into this next game on November 12th against Detroit, they're 5-4. The Bears are 5-4, and the Vikings are one game ahead at 6-3. And then they have probably their worst performance of the season in their 10th game of the year, a very, very bad loss to a very, very bad Lions team.
Yeah, they go up to Detroit or whatever, over, down, wherever. They lose to the Lions 31-22, like you mentioned. They just played the Lions the week before the Bears game and beaten them. Then they have that big win against the Bears, and they turn around and lose to the Lions in front of just 44,000 people, which is half a house up there in that building. So obviously the Lions being that bad is taking its toll on attendance.
Four turnovers for the Packers in this game.
And they fall back down to 5-5 with looming a trip to San Francisco to take on the defending Super Bowl champions, who, unlike the year previous when they were struggling, the 49ers in 1989 were a machine who would only end up losing 2 games, I believe, the whole season. And the Packers go out there and hand them one of those 2 losses by way of a 21-17 upset victory at Candlestick Park.
Yeah, if I can just digress here for a second, the 49ers very much the team of the 80s in the NFL, and that's a well-earned title, but they really kind of hit a lull after 84. Montana starts to get some injuries, 85, 86. Bill Walsh brings in Steve Young, I believe, starting with the 87 season, and there's this quarterback controversy. Montana gets benched a couple times for Steve Young, and they kind of, I don't want to say they eke out a Super Bowl, but they, like you said, in 88, they weren't even good enough to be the number 1 seed in the NFC, but they win a Super. They beat the Bears in Chicago. They have a last-second Super Bowl winning drive against Denver in 88 in Super Bowl 23. Then Walsh retires. Seifert comes in. They bring in some younger guys at some positions. Seifert sort of puts an end to the quarterback controversy and installs Montana. And then in 89 and then again in 90, which is a story for another day that we've talked about, the Niners are as dominant as they've been in 5 or 6 years in 1989 and 1990, evidenced, like you said, by the fact that they're 14-2 this year, and one of their 2 losses is to Green Bay in San Francisco at Candlestick Park. I just want to see... is this another comeback? I mean, I guess it's technically a comeback in that it is 14-7. It's 14-7 Niners at one point. Is it not? Hold on. Let me find why am I having a hard time finding the scoring summary? Okay. So actually, no, I take that back. The Niners actually never lead. This is a back and forth game. There's no comeback needed. Mikowski throws the touchdown pass to Sharp and actually has 2 rushing touchdowns of his own to win a close one, 21-17, but they beat a very, very good 49er team, an all-time great 49er team, and they don't even have to come back.
And they start to roll after this, actually. They go to Minnesota the following week, or excuse me, they're at home in Milwaukee. The following week against Minnesota, they eke out another 1-point victory to finally get away from the 500 trap. They were 6-5, and they win to go up to 7-5 over the biggest, the biggest threat to the division at that point, I guess you would have to say.
Yeah, this ties them with the Vikings at 7-5 after 12 games. This one, I guess, I mean, they do technically come back. This is the 3rd time they've played Herschel Walker in the last 8 weeks. He scores a touchdown.
In 3 different stadiums, by the way, because they play him in Green Bay, Milwaukee, and Minnesota.
There you go. Touchdown 2 touchdowns for Sharp. Sharp is just having an incredible year. And these are the few. Sterling Sharp, who just got into the Hall of Fame a couple years ago. And it's funny because I remember when I first got into football, 93-ish, there was this, Sterling Sharp was amazing. He was Brett Favre. And I remember somebody saying to me, hey, did you know that Sterling Sharp's brother also plays in the NFL? Yeah, he's a tight end for the Denver Broncos. His name is Shannon. Well, shortly after Sterling Sharp suffers a career-ending injury, Shannon Sharp goes on to play a lot more years, actually wins 3 Super Bowls, 2 with Denver and then 1 with Baltimore. He gets into the Hall of Fame. In his Hall of Fame speech, Shannon Sharp says, I might be the only Hall of Famer whose brother was a better football player than him. And that sort of renews this look at the career of Sterling Sharp, short though it may have been, and he finally gets into the Hall of Fame in his own right a couple of years ago. So, and this is one of the 89 is really his first real dominant year as a wide receiver.
I feel like I thought they were cousins for a while, but so they're 7-5. They're in really good shape. They go down to Tampa Bay. You remember they lost to in week 1, and they beat Tampa Bay again in a real close game. They beat them 17-16. So they've won 5 of their last 6, and the wins are by 3 in overtime, by 1, by 4, by 1, and by 1. Are there margins of victory in this?
In this game, they, after a 17-yard reception by a receiver by the name of Carl Bland, Mikowski has to run down and spike the ball with 1 second left on the Tampa Bay 29 to get Jackie out there for the 47-yard field goal, which he makes. Now they're 8-5, but I believe Minnesota wins here too, right? They, where's Minnesota? Minnesota beats the Bears, so they're 8-5 also.
Okay, you have the standings like as of each week up there.
No, I'm just looking at the scores, and then I know they were both 7-5 the week before, so when they both won, they're both 8-5.
Oh, okay. So the next week they are back at Lambeau actually for the first time since that Bears game on November 5th. So they're at Lambeau for the first time in over a month, and they lose badly to an average Chiefs team. They lose 21-3, and they fall to 8-6.
Yeah, they're never really in this one after the second quarter, when all of the scoring in this game is in the second quarter. The field goal from Green Bay and 3 touchdowns from the Chiefs. They win the turnover battle. Actually, Kansas City loses 3 fumbles, and the Packers have a fumble loss and an interception. But yeah, they really just don't ever. You just got a lot of. I'm just looking at the drives here. You got a punt. They basically just never really get anything moving. You just basically every drive here is a punt in the fourth quarter. They never get anything started on offense.
All right, so 2 games left,
but they're still in it. They're still in it.
2 games left. They're 8-6. They're at Chicago, December 17th. Chicago, we mentioned, was in the middle of a tailspin that would see them miss the playoffs, and Green Bay wins, and by their standards, in fairly convincing fashion. So they beat the Bears for the first time since 1984 earlier in the year, and then they end up sweeping them by way of a 40-28 victory at Soldier Field on December the 17th.
They win this game, but they don't get the help that they need to stay in the playoff race. I believe they're eliminated from playoff contention after week 15. And I don't know, because Cleveland beats Minnesota, but I don't know. Maybe they were still technically in it, but I thought that what I saw is that by week 16, they were essentially out of it. But I'm just trying to, is there a way I can, there's got to be a way you can pull up the standings from, there used to be somewhere you could pull up the standings like by a specific day, but I don't know. Here we go. Let me see what's going on here. What if I click there? NFL Week 15. Do they have the standings here? Week 15. And no, it doesn't look like I can pull that up. But so, and maybe this is just a bad job out of us, but I don't know. I thought what I saw is that they were not in it by week 16, but I could be wrong about that.
So week 16, they played Dallas, and this is one of those weird anomalies.
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. It's week 16. They're still in it after 15. In 16, they don't get the help they need. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So this is one of those weird anomalies. If you finished in 5th place back then, you played a very weird schedule. Like if you look at the schedule because they'd been in 5th place the year before, if you look at the schedule they only play 2 games against the AFC. They play the Dolphins and the Chiefs, who are not in the same division. Presumably, those were 5th place teams in 1988. That's what I'm guessing. So,
and they played Dallas twice.
And when you finished in 5th, you played the other 5th place team in your conference twice because there was only 4 teams in the NFC West. So there wasn't a 5th place team for you to play. So they had to play the East and the Central had to play each other twice. So they beat up on the Cowboys 20-10. Cowboys finished 1-15. But like you said, 10-6 doesn't get them in. The Vikings win the division on the tiebreaker at 10-6. The wild cards are the 11-5 Rams and the 11-5 Eagles. Now I looked this up. Had it been just the next year where 6 teams made the playoffs,
they'd have been
Washington was also 10-6, as was Green Bay. And I don't have it here, but I think I must have had it written down from when I looked at this originally. Based on assuming the tiebreakers were what the current tiebreakers are now, conference record, because the Packers and the Redskins didn't play that year, the Packers would have won it. The Packers would have gotten in if there were 6 teams in the playoffs that year. And you could go, well, the next year, 6 teams made the playoffs. So it's not like it would have been impossible. And had they been the 6th seed and we were using the 1990 scheduling model, they would have been on their way to the Metrodome to play the Vikings for the 3rd time this year and Herschel Walker for the 4th time this year in the wild card round of the playoffs. But as it is, they were just on the outside looking in a NFC that ultimately saw the 49ers, who the Packers beat earlier in the year, emerge victorious, and go on to win their 2nd straight Super Bowl and 4th of the 1980s.
Just a couple things. This had to be, I'm guessing that because you had a couple of teams at 10-6, you had Washington and you had Green Bay. I'm guessing you probably had both of those. You know, the fact that 2 double-digit win teams didn't make the playoffs in the NFC, I don't know what it looked like in the AFC, but that maybe was part of the impetus for this idea of like, hey, let's add another team.
So if you look at the AFC this year, so Denver went 11-5, right? Denver was the 1 seed. No other team won double-digit games. The number 2 seed in the AFC in 1989 was Cleveland at 9-6-1.
Meanwhile, you had 7 teams in the NFC with 10 wins.
And I think at least 6 of those teams were better than anybody in the AFC than Green Bay, or besides maybe Denver. Like this was one of those years where the tilting of the conferences was the most severe.
Yeah, the Bills were still a year away, right?
Yeah, they went 9-7. They won their division, but at 9-7.
One more thing, I have to imagine that the help that they needed was for Cincinnati to beat Minnesota, because that was who they would have been in. You know, they didn't have a shot at the wild card, right? Because who did you say the wild card was?
It was Philly and the Rams, who both went 11-5.
So yeah, the Rams lost. The Rams beat New England, and Philly beat Phoenix, and those were two of the worst teams in the NFL in the late 80s. So I wonder maybe if one of those teams, maybe because they didn't play Philly. They beat the Rams, right?
No, I think they lost to the Rams in week 3.
They almost came back. Okay, so yeah, they probably wouldn't have won the tiebreaker against the Rams. I don't know if they would have had it against Philly. What they probably needed was for Cincinnati to beat Minnesota. That was a game, and there's just two very interesting things about this game. The Bengals are not good this year after having made it to the Super Bowl and almost won the Super Bowl the year before. This is a 9:00 Monday night game on Christmas that the Bengals lost to Minnesota to knock the Packers out of the playoffs. And the second thing that's interesting about this to me is maybe the Bengals were a little bit tired because the week before they had beaten a pretty decent Houston Oilers team by a score of 61-7. So maybe they were a little worn out. The Oilers, who I think probably make the playoffs. Yeah, a playoff team, the 9-7 Oilers make the playoffs, like you talked about. The Bengals hang 61 points on them, but by the following week, Christmas night, they've worn themselves out and they can't give the Packers any help. They finished 10-6. Mikowski is second in MVP voting to Joe Montana. Lindy Infante is the coach of the year, and I don't know what else you have, but then after that, maybe we could just kind of talk about how things play out for the next couple years.
Yeah, so 1990, they enter with some expectations. They start 6-5, just like the year before, but instead of where they won 5 out of 6 to finish the year, they lose their last 5 games to finish 6-10. Mikowski misses half of the season in 1991. He's hurt. I don't know who I got to look up who started in his place a lot of that year.
One of the guys who starts in his place that year is a guy by the last name of, and I'll pull up his full name in a second. A guy by the name of, bear with me for a second, Anthony Dilweg plays. He's number 8 for the Packers, and he starts 7 games for them in 1990. His grandfather is Lavi Dilweg, who was a 5-time All-Pro and 3-time NFL champion with the Packers in the 1920s.
91, they fall even further. They're 4-12. Again, Mikowski plays about half the year. Mike Tomczak makes 7 starts to Mikowski's 8. They fall to 4-12. They're obviously back to sort of bottoming out. At the end of the year, Lindy Infante is fired. Mike Holmgren is hired. They acquire Brett Favre, and they're off to the races in short order. 9-7 in 92, and then from there, they're a playoff team and a contender and a Super Bowl champion by 1996.
And Favre makes his Packers debut in a game, the third game of the season, when Mikowski gets hurt, and then Favre doesn't not start another game for the Packers until God when? Till he leaves, right? He never misses a game.
Is that true?
I think that might be true. I mean, that's real easy to pull up here. Give me 1 second here.
While you're doing Lindy Infante, I don't know what he does. 1992, 3, 94, 95. He's the Colts offensive coordinator and actually gets another chance as a head coach in the NFL in 1996 and 1997 as the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts just before Peyton Manning gets there.
Yeah, and he makes a playoff. So yeah, Favre does not miss a start until his very last season in the NFL with the Vikings in 2010.
Okay.
He starts every game for the Packers his whole career. Once he gets the job, he starts all 16 for the Jets in that interesting year, and then 16 in his first year with the Packers. Mikowski makes it to the playoffs with Detroit in 95. That was one of Barry Sanders' That was one of the years where Barry Sanders was really kind of at his best. How many?
I don't think he quarterback though. I don't think he was starting on that team.
Mikowski?
It says he threw 20 passes the whole season.
Oh, but he plays in the playoffs because Mitchell gets hurt. That's what it is.
He went 14 of 23 for 206 yards in the 95 playoffs.
Yeah, but 3 touchdowns. I got to see this. Hold on. So the Lions that year lost to Philly. Oh, Mitchell didn't get hurt. I was looking at this the other day. They play the Eagles in the playoffs, and the Eagles are winning at one point 51-7. So that's when they pull Scott Mitchell and they put Don Mikowski in. So you're right. He does play in most of a playoff game for the Lions, but that's because his team is losing by 44 points. Yeah, so Mikowski gets hurt in 93. I'm sorry, no, not 90, not 93. I think it's 92. And Brett Favre comes in, and there's two really interesting things about Brett Favre's first completed pass. First of all, do you know who he completes it to?
Yeah, he completed it to himself.
Do you know who the television play-by-play guy was?
No.
It was a guy by the name of Michael Emmerich, better known as Doc Emmerich.
A hockey announcer?
The famous NHL announcer, and member of the inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame's broadcaster wing, all these different things. But he did a little bit of football in he did a handful of games for CBS. It looks like 7 games total. He was paired with Matt Millen and with Hank Stram, and he called Brett Favre's first ever completion to himself in 1992.
That's a very interesting tidbit. I did not know that.
Well, that's why people listen to Hello Old Sports.
So, yeah, I mean, again, not a team that I think would get mentioned as, one of the great Packer teams of all time. They don't even make the playoffs, but, and certainly within 5 years, it's a season that kind of gets lost once they're making the playoffs every year. And they've really continued pretty much unbroken since 1993 as a, contender year in and year out. Maybe not every single year, but like they're like the Steelers. Like, you wouldn't bank on them being really bad any year. And, they've had a run of success where they basically went from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers. And, Jordan Love certainly isn't in that group yet, but he seems like he's their franchise quarterback. It's hard to, it's easy to forget that this team was nowhere for over 20 years. Like they really were, this was a bright spot in sort of a desert of 4-12 seasons of, playing 3 games a year in Milwaukee and 5 at Lambeau and, almost being relegated to like, a franchise, like a college team where you're like, yeah, but they were something serious in the 50s. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, that was a long time ago. So, this was it was the best team they'd had. It was at worst the 3rd best team they'd had in 20 years.
Yeah, and I think that's important. And it's kind of the same thing they went through right before Lombardi came in, right? It's like they were big in the 20s and 30s and early 40s. Then they were terrible for 20 years. And then they had to sort of come roaring back. And then they were terrible in the 70s, terrible for most of the 80s. Now, they only won 1 Super Bowl instead of 5 NFL titles. But nonetheless, they came roaring back. And I guess this 89 season is probably important to that, right? It's the first of, Sharp really starts to break out. It's 14-23 in receiving yards, leads the league in receptions. It's sort of a harbinger of these big time receiving seasons that he has. Sterling Sharp in 7 seasons averages more than 1,000 yards a season. And, how many rushing TDs? 65 rushing TDs in 7 seasons. The guy, like I said, in a very short period of time, puts up some crazy numbers as a wide receiver. Favre's not there yet. Holmgren's not there yet. Most of the defensive guys, I think pretty much all the defensive guys aren't there yet. But you have to wonder if that 1 year kind of helped establish them as somebody who could contend. And then, the groundwork gets laid. Plus, they bring in Harlan as their new team president, and he ends up really sort of shepherding them through the next 20 years or so.
Yeah, the only thing you can't really say, there's almost outside of Chris Jackie, and from what I can tell, Ken Rutgers, who was a tackle backup. I guess he started for a little in the mid 90s. There's only 2 to 3 guys who were actually on that 89 team who are still around in the Super Bowl year in 96, and none of them are cornerstone pieces. But
what you do have is some guys who would still be around a few years later in 93 when they sign Reggie White and they make it to the playoffs for the first time under Favre and Holmgren. So
that's fair.
It's not really. It's not the step before the championship team. It's the step before the step before.
Fair enough.
Well, this was good. This is another one. This is we've gotten a few in a row now where it's random, but it would have been a good topic anyway. The 63 Lakers were like that. Obviously, the Cardinals team. No, it wasn't the Bucks Super Bowl team was another one. So we've gotten a few of these through the years where this would have been a good topic, even if it hadn't been a random team.
And next time we're doing random baseball team, because the number is not giving us what we need for baseball. So we'll still do the random thing, but we're doing a baseball team. But we probably have a little while before we do another random team. So
we do, because we've got lots of things to get to before then, and we appreciate you as always for joining us. And until then, I'm Dan Newman.
And I'm Andrew Newman. Goodbye, old sports.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.